Now, to help us dive deeper into all the politics of this weekend, from the SACP to the EFF and even the MK Party birthday celebration tomorrow, I'm joined now by political analyst Dr. Kagiso TK Pooe. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. A very busy political long weekend as well. Yesterday, we also heard from the EFF as they kicked off the National People's Assembly. For hours, over 3 hours, the leader of the economic freedom fighters, Julius Malema, spoke. And he had quite a bit to say. For you, what stood out from when it kicked off yesterday and today's press briefing?
Well, evening, and thanks for having me. Well, I think two key things for me really did stand out. One is, it seems like the EFF, even in the speech, even they are trying to actually understand what actually happened during the general elections that they declined. Because it would seem as though in the build-up to the elections, and I think in previous years, the EFF was actually getting ready for what they believed was going to be their big momentous moment. So I think in the speech, it was a bit of that to say, listen, what really happened? And it was actually quite interesting that the length of the speech, one could make the argument that the length really kind of was part of the confusion of trying to basically understand what was happening there. And I think the second thing, which seems to be really coming out, is there is a big question about where do they go to next? While I think it's going to be a fait accompli in terms of who's going to be the president or the CIC of the party and who's going to be possibly number two and also the secretary general as such, there is a bigger question about where do they go past this? What does momentum look like? Is it that they really say, listen, we're going to put everything into the upcoming local government elections? Is it that we're going to see ourselves as an enemy to the MK? It's just that question of just trying to find an anchor of where does this party go to after what is really a disappointing 2024.
And with that question of where to next, they seem to be bogged down by what is possibly going to happen and what is already seemingly happening, where they have had some senior leaders leaving the party. Julius Malema seemed to have a very defensive approach, for lack of a better word, in that press briefing today when journalists were asking him about the absence of Dr Mbuyiseni Ndlozi, for instance. And of course, we are there to talk about the main things of the day, but one cannot but help but wonder what is really going on there, because it consumed quite a bit of the conversation as well.
Well, I think on his part, he might argue that very irritatingly so that there were questions about Dr. Ndlozi as such. But as I said, I think it goes back to what I'd say the theme of that 3-hour speech was that sometimes I think we should probably as South Africans have better understanding of this, because we kind of see this a lot in many political parties. There's just this question, and it's very hard once parties go into a decline of sorts, is how do you handle the communication of saying, listen, I don't have all the answers. Yes, I'm standing here as probably the number one of the party, but in truth, I don't have all the answers. And yes, there are many people exiting. You know, it's that balance of how do you become vulnerable at the same time, how do you show leadership? And I think the EFF and Mr. Malema in particular is probably finding that it's his moment where he has to sort of answer that question. And sometimes when you don't have an answer to this question, the natural thing is to cling on to the fact that, yes, people have left and you lash out. And because if you had to really reflect, as you said, about how he came out in it, you know, there was a better way he could have answered that question. And the fact that it just keeps popping up again really does show that there's an inability to communicate that vulnerability, and also an inability to say, listen, we quite don't know where we're going, and we're just trying to figure it out. And I don't think it's probably going to be the last time this question gets asked, but we just have to understand, and I think South Africans, having looked at the former governing party, have to understand that this is how it plays out when you cannot answer the questions of the day, and you seemingly do lash out. And if we can't really have political parties that are a bit mature in starting to answer this question, because look, you have to understand political parties, when it comes to election, it's their lifeblood. If you're not moving forward, you're moving backwards. And if you cannot give a proper diagnostic of why you're moving backwards, you will look for any other excuse other than being honest and saying, maybe I am the problem in the room, and I just need some time to reflect a bit.
And it seems that is a theme that is popping up a bit more and more now of late. And also, as we're speaking about this, they are in a closed session now. They will be nominating as well a new leadership. TK, do you foresee any major changes to their top 6 structure at all, or will it be more of the same?
Well, as I say, just looking at the general mood and looking at history, what tends to happen is parties take one of two particular directions. One is that there's a clean slate, which is to say, the former leader graciously says, listen, I've taken you as far as I can. I think we can rule that one out. That's not happening. Or you tend to take the second alternative, which is to say, the leader at the time, or let's say the figurehead at the time, simply make sure that the people that come in are probably more yes men and women, and you kind of quell dissent. So in that setting, I foresee that it's going to be people who are probably more aligned to what Mr. Malema would want. But the key question would be, are there going to be people who are going to be given room to be able to critique the leader, or let's say the representative? And I think that probably is going to be the biggest challenge, because again, it goes back to them pondering where they are at the moment.
Yeah.
If you go into the room with the same energy that you came out of in 2024, the likelihood is that the next 5 years are basically going to be the same.
I want to move on to the SACP, who've also been gathering this weekend as well. Lots has come out of there. The former President Thabo Mbeki also speaking about a national dialogue that will be announced by President Cyril Ramaphosa pretty soon. But also what was interesting that came out of there, as we do know, the SACP is planning on contesting the local government elections that would be in competition of their alliance partner, the ANC. But also what they mentioned, Solima Baila had said that what they had a big issue with the GNU was the fact that the DA got 6 ministries and the SACP got 1. And they're saying, well, where do your loyalties lie? We've been in alliance with you for all this time. And in fact, we even campaign for you too. And then when when push comes to shove and the proof is in the pudding is going to the DA.
Well, look, I think the only honest thing that's really actually come out from the SACP conference is that we're finally getting to the rub of the nut, which is they feel as though they've been slighted. But I think that's not something new. If anything, if I was the SACP, much like the EFF, I'd ask the question. The SACP, and I think we have to really hold them to account, has played a part in South Africa's, I'd say, decline for the last 2 decades. If I'm not mistaken, it is the SACP that gave us former President Jacob Zuma. It is the SACP that gave us current President Cyril Ramaphosa. The question should not be whether they're going to contest or not. The question should be, does the SACP actually have the skills to be able to understand the political dynamics of South Africa? Because based on their choices, I don't really see the SACP as being an important figure in South African politics. And I think we do ourselves a favor by simply understanding the SACP is a relic of history. They are no longer relevant to what South Africa might be. The only relevance is in the fact that, listen, the ANC is in decline. Therefore, minimally, I think if the ANC were to lose 100 votes or 100,000 votes, it becomes an issue. But in the grander scheme of politics, the SACP has long been irrelevant to South African politics. So I think we're actually doing them a bit of a favor by actually speaking to them. The fact that I think President Mbeki was there, that probably is a bit of more of a surprise. But again, the question you asked about him saying that South Africa needs a national dialogue. Look, maybe it's a question of age and maybe concentration, which one doesn't have. That I think South Africans know what the problem South Africa is. The only confusion our South African voters, as we saw, is that it would seem as though there's no political party and there's no leadership to actually be able to address the problems we have. So we don't need another dialogue. If anything, if we were to go such a route, I think there really is a question about the sanity of this country. Because is any South African confused about what the 3 big issues in South Africa are? It's unemployment. It's the fact that we have yet to resolve issues of the rural and the urban divide. And it's a question that, look, historical issues such as land have not really been sorted out. Do we really need another conference to tell us about these things?
Yeah. TK, thank you so much for your insights as always. That was political analyst Dr. TK Pooe.